Snow hammers the roof of a lonely cabin in Aspen, carving the forest into shadows and breathless silence. Inside, a battered German shepherd mother, Freya, presses herself between a wounded mountain rescuer and the danger stalking him through the trees. Her cracked silver bell trembles with each breath, catching firelight like a secret begging to be revealed. Outside, two figures move with the precision of hunters, their boots carving a path toward the one creature they lost, or the one creature that escaped. Inside, a forgotten past stirs awake. A hidden ridge, a vanished breeder, a line of dogs born to save lives, and one man who thought he had nothing left worth saving. Tonight, the cabin is more than shelter. It is a battleground of truth, a sanctuary of miracles, a final test of courage for those the world has overlooked. And when Freya rises, when Elias chooses to stand, the storm outside won't be the only thing breaking open. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe no animal or human should ever face the dark alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who still believes in second chances. Snow drifted in slow spirals across the mountain road, moving with the quiet confidence of a world that no longer needed witnesses. Aspen lay hushed beneath it, a city wrapped in garlands, wreaths, and warm yellow lights spread across rooftops in celebration of Christmas Eve. Yet the storm blunted every sparkle, smearing the colors into pale ghosts as if the night were reclaiming the holiday for itself. The mountains surrounding the city stood like white giants, their peaks swallowed by thick winter clouds. Even the forest seemed to lean closer, as though the pines themselves were bracing for something unseen. But the old forestry road cutting through the hillside remained empty. It was not a path for tourists or families seeking postcard views. It belonged to hunters, rangers, and storm-struck wanderers who did not mind a silence heavy enough to settle in the bones. Tonight, it felt like the kind of place where breath froze into secrets before it touched the air. Beneath a snow-laden pine tree, a dark shape curled against the trunk. A German shepherd mother, her fur stiffened by ice, folded herself protectively around a single trembling pup. Their breaths were shallow and fragile, barely stirring the frost accumulating around them. No tracks surrounded them, no prints of the person who had tied the chain around her neck and left her to the mercy of the storm. Only the wind bore witness to their weight, combing through the branches with a mournful hiss. No one was supposed to be out here, not tonight, not when the cold had sharpened itself into a blade meant to cut through anything that dared to live. But a set of headlights sliced through the trees, casting long, ghostly shadows across the snow. Behind the wheel of the black truck was Elias Ward, a man who carried silence like a second heartbeat. At 41, his face had the rugged, chiseled angles of someone carved by wind and hardship. His beard, once dark, had faded at the edges into winter gray. His hair was cropped close, practical rather than stylish, and carried the same early gray along the temples. What defined him more than anything were his eyes, deep slate blue, alert and weary at once, the kind of eyes that had seen both the beauty and brutality of high mountains. 15 years in the Colorado Avalanche Rescue Unit had built him into a man of precision and control, but also a man of ghosts. The ghosts lived inside his left ear, a ringing that never fully left after the blast of collapsing snow during the rescue that ended his career. On that day, he had dug through ice and debris until his fingers bled, searching for a skier whose frantic voice had faded beneath the roar of the avalanche. When he finally found the young man, it was too late. Elias survived. The boy did not. The memory pinned itself to his ribs like a shard of ice he could never thaw. He left the rescue unit months later, moved into a cabin on the mountain's edge, and convinced himself that solitude would patch what guilt had torn open. It did not. Tonight he drove because stillness sharpened the ringing in his head, and moving, any direction, any purpose, kept the inner noise at bay. The truck rattled along the forest road, its tires crunching through snow so thick it muted the sound almost instantly. He leaned forward, squinting through the storm. His breath fogged lightly against the inside of the windshield. Then something glinted near the tree line, a faint spark of silver swallowing and releasing light with the movement of the wind. Elias slowed. At first he thought it was ice clinging to a branch, a trick of the storm. But then came the sound, a small metallic chime, thin and uneven, like a bell struggling to remember how to sing. He stopped the truck, turned off the engine, and stepped into the cold. The world outside was a wall of white, and the wind slammed into him hard enough to push against his heavy coat. He pulled a flashlight from his pocket and trudged toward the sound, the beam wobbling across drifts and exposed roots. The shape under the pine resolved slowly, a mound of snow that breathed. A German shepherd lifted her head. Her fur, once thick and majestic, clung to her ribs in frozen clumps. Ice crystals webbed along her ears and tail. Around her neck was a thin, worn leather strap holding a small silver bell cracked clean through the center. The bell swung as she moved, chiming weakly against the leather. Beside her lay the pup, its tiny body trembling more from exhaustion than cold. Its black and tan fur bristled with frost, and its breaths came in soft, helpless puffs. Elias knelt, lowering the flashlight so its beam fell gently across them instead of directly into their eyes. The mother did not growl or retreat. She watched him with amber eyes clouded by fatigue yet still burning with a quiet, stubborn protectiveness. The pup only whimpered, shifting closer into her warmth. "Hey," Elias murmured, his voice rough from disuse. "Easy, I'm just looking." He saw then what held her in place, a chain partially buried beneath the snow, wrapped tightly around an exposed tree root. Whoever tied her here had left her to die. His jaw tightened. He reached for the chain. The cold metal seared through his glove, and the sharp scrape against the bark sent a piercing echo through his damaged ear. The world seemed to tilt for a moment, sound fading into the memory of cracking snow, distant cries, and a weight collapsing from above. He closed his eyes, forcing air into his lungs until the trembling eased. When he opened them again, the shepherd was still watching him, not fearful, not pleading, simply present, as if telling him, "You're still here. So am I." Elias gripped the chain and pulled. It resisted. He braced himself and pulled again. On the third attempt, it snapped free, the metal clashing loudly in his hand. The mother flinched but did not pull away. He removed his coat, wrapped it around her stiff body, and tucked the bucol, pup inside the folds. The mother nuzzled the small bundle instinctively before looking back at Elias, her eyes softening with something that resembled trust, or maybe just surrender to someone who hadn't walked away. Lifting her surprised him. She weighed far less than she should have, the harsh winter carving her down to muscle and willpower. The pup wriggled weakly against his chest, a fragile heartbeat that pressed warmth into his arms. He trudged back toward the truck, shielding them against the wind. When he set the mother on the passenger seat, the bell on her collar chimed again, a thin, fractured note, yet somehow clearer than before. Elias paused, one hand resting near the bell. For the first time in months, the ringing in his ear softened, replaced by the steady breathing of two lives that still fought to exist. He climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away from the forest. The storm swallowed the road ahead, but for the first time he did not mind its uncertainty. Beside him, the mother dog lowered her head, exhausted but safe. The pup nestled into her warmth, and in the quiet of that truck cab, something inside Elias, something brittle and long neglected, began to thaw. The storm had quieted by the time Elias reached his cabin, though the world outside still trembled beneath the weight of drifting snow. His driveway was barely visible, blanketed in white so thick it softened even the edges of his headlights. The cabin itself, small, wood-framed, and perched against the rise of a hill, looked more like an abandoned shelter than a home, its windows faint with frost and its porch buried nearly to the steps. Elias parked the truck close to the door, killed the engine, and for a moment simply sat there, letting the defrosting fan hum against the windshield. The mother German shepherd lay curled beside him, exhausted but conscious, her head lifting whenever the pup shifted inside the folds of his coat. The cabin's outside light flickered weakly, a single bulb fighting to stay alive. Elias took a breath that fogged in the cold, then opened his door. "All right," he muttered, "let's get you inside." He gathered the pup first, tucking the small creature against his chest, and then lifted the mother, cradling her as though she were made of thin glass. She shivered but did not resist. The silver bell on her collar tapped against his arm, releasing a faint note that barely rose above the wind. Inside, the cabin held the scent of old pine and burnt firewood, the remnants of a life lived half present. Elias switched on a lamp near the stone hearth. Its warm light spilled across the space, a single-room layout with a modest kitchen in the back, a wooden table scarred with years of use, a sofa pushed against the wall, and the old iron stove that had once been the heart of the place. He set the mother dog gently onto a thick wool blanket near the stove, then placed the pup beside her. The stove was cold, so he crouched and worked quickly to stack kindling and logs. His hands, usually steady, fumbled a little from the lingering ache of memory and cold. When the match finally caught, flames climbed eagerly upward, casting a flickering glow across the room. The mother dog turned her head toward the warmth, blinking slowly as though unsure whether the fire was real or imagined. Elias stepped back to look at them more clearly. The pup was tiny, too young to endure a storm like that, with ears still soft at the tips and paws too large for its body. The mother appeared older, perhaps 4 or 5 years, with deep brown eyes framed by dark markings that accentuated her alert but weary expression. Her body was lean, more from deprivation than natural build, and her fur, though thick, had patches where cold and stress had stripped away the sheen. She watched Elias cautiously, but there was no hostility, only a guarded sense of gratitude. A sudden knock startled her, her ears lifting sharply before flattening again. Elias's jaw tightened. No one came out here unless they were lost, or they needed something, or they didn't know what waited behind the door. He moved quietly to answer it, pulling aside the cold metal latch. On the small porch stood a man bundled in a snow-dusted parka, a wool scarf wrapped around a wide, weather-beaten face. His beard, thick and ginger brown, carried flecks of frost. His nose was slightly crooked, the mark of a poorly healed break, and his eyes, hazel with bright gold flecks, held a mix of warmth and confrontation, as if he were someone quick to smile, but quicker to judge when necessary. "Evening," the man said, voice deep but friendly. "Storm's easing up. Wanted to check you weren't snowed in." It took Elias a second to place him. Then he recognized the parka, a forestry department issue. "Harlan Briggs," the man said, confirming the memory. "U.S. Forest Service. I've been checking cabins on the ridge since some trees came down near the trail." Harlan Briggs, now clearly visible in the lamplight, looked to be in his late 40s. Broad across the shoulders, with a slight forward lean from years carrying heavy gear, his presence filled the doorway easily. Despite the rugged exterior, there was something almost fatherly about him, a man who chose blunt honesty over delicate politeness, the kind of person who scared strangers but comforted friends. "Everything all right here?" he asked, brushing snow from his beard. Elias hesitated, then stepped aside just enough for Harlan to glimpse the blanket near the hearth. The shepherd lifted her head weakly, the pup nestled against her side. The silver bell chimed as she shifted. Harlan's expression changed instantly, his brows knitted, the hard lines of his face softening. "Where'd you find them?" "Off the forestry road," Elias replied. "She was chained to a tree." Harlan exhaled sharply, a sound of disbelief edged with anger. "People," he muttered, shaking his head. "You give them the gift of nature, and they repay it with cruelty." He knelt a little to get a better look. His movements were gentle for someone with such a large frame, and his voice lowered without instruction. "She's lucky you came along. Storm that cold would have taken her in another hour." Elias felt something in his chest shift, an old instinct, the one that had once pushed him into danger just to pull someone out of it. "I'm taking her to the clinic tomorrow. Maribel should still be open after the holiday." Harlan nodded approvingly. "Good woman, that one. Been patching up animals longer than I've been walking these woods." He rose to his full height, brushing off his knees. "Well, I've got 2 more cabins to check before midnight. You need anything? Radio went out earlier, but I can hike down if there's trouble." "I've got it handled," Elias said. Harlan studied him for a moment, as though searching for what kind of man chose to take in a freezing dog and her pup on Christmas Eve. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him, because he gave a brief nod. "Take care of yourself, Ward, and take care of them." When the door shut, behind him, Elias returned to the dogs. The mother had begun grooming the pup, her movements slow but intentional. Elias crouched beside them. "You need a name," he murmured, and though he did not touch her yet, he felt the softness of her presence settle into the room. The bell on her collar glinted under the firelight. The crack that ran through it caught the flame like a scar catching memory. He stood and crossed the room to heat a small pot of water, mixing it with powdered milk he kept in the cupboard. It had been years since anyone but him had needed warmth from this cabin, and he didn't realize how empty it had felt until he watched the shepherd's eyes follow him with quiet hope. When the milk cooled enough, he knelt again and offered the bowl. The mother sniffed it first, then drank slowly, pausing often as though relearning the rhythm of survival. The pup attempted to mimic her, dipping its tiny muzzle clumsily into the bowl before sneezing milk onto Elias's hand. His breath left in what might have been a chuckle, small, surprised, almost foreign. Outside, the storm shifted. Wind brushed against the cabin walls, not fierce now, but whispering, as if relieved that something fragile had found safety. The fire crackled brighter, and a warmth began to pool through the space that felt larger than the flames. Elias sat on the floor near the dogs, leaning his back against the sofa, and let his body ease into the moment. No memories chased him. No echoes rang in his ear. There was only the shepherd's steady breathing, the pup's soft shifting sounds, and the faint metallic note of the cracked bell that had brought him to them. And in that unlikely harmony, Elias realized the night was no longer silent. It was quietly alive. Morning arrived with a sky the color of tarnished silver, heavy clouds pressing low over Aspen as though reluctant to let daylight through. The storm had eased, but its remnants clung stubbornly to the trees and rooftops, sculpting the valley into a landscape of stillness. Inside Elias's cabin, however, motion stirred, small, tentative, but unmistakably alive. The pup awoke first, its tiny paws twitching against the wool blanket as it squeaked out a sound somewhere between a yawn and a complaint. The mother lifted her head immediately, her instincts unbroken despite exhaustion, and nudged the pup toward her chest. Elias, who had fallen asleep sitting against the sofa, startled at the motion, rubbing a hand over his face as memory settled gradually into recognition. The fire in the stove had burned low, offering only a soft orange glow, but the cabin was warm. Warmer than he expected after a night spent dozing in a crooked position. He checked the shepherds first, leaning close enough to hear their breathing. Both were steadier today. The mother still looked frail, her ribs too visible, but her eyes had regained a faint vigor, a steadiness that hadn't been there the night before. The pup wriggled with clumsy enthusiasm when he touched its head, pressing a cold nose into his palm. "You're a persistent little thing," Elias muttered, though the corner of his mouth lifted in an expression he barely recognized in himself. He rose stiffly and fed the stove fresh logs. Sparks leapt upward, crackling to life. The mother watched him with a quiet interest, ears flicking with each sound. Her silver bell chimed faintly as she shifted position, its cracked edge catching the firelight in a way that made the metal appear warmer than it was. Elias poured water into a kettle and set it to heat, then reached for his coat. The sun, what little broke through, had begun to rise, and he needed to get them to the veterinary clinic before temperatures dropped again. "We'll get you checked out by Maribel," he said aloud, though the words were more reassurance to himself. As he dressed, the sound of footsteps crunching outside caught his attention. It wasn't the heavy stride of Harlan Briggs, nor the tentative shuffle of a lost hiker. These steps were quick, purposeful, confident. A sharp knock followed. Elias frowned, not expecting anyone so early. He opened the door to find a woman standing on his porch, bundled in a charcoal wool coat with snow dusting her shoulders. She was in her early 50s, tall and graceful, even beneath layers of winter clothing. Her hair, silver with streaks of darker ash, was braided neatly over one shoulder, and her skin held the warm undertone of someone who spent her life moving between harsh weather and indoor care. Her eyes, a cool hazel, were sharp but kind, the kind of eyes that appraised without judgment. "Maribel Clark," she said before he could ask. "Harlan radioed that you'd found a shepherd, and her pup said they might be in rough shape." Maribel Clark, Aspen's only longtime veterinarian, was a woman whose presence carried an air of structured calm, as if chaos obeyed her out of habit. Though slender, she moved with a quiet confidence earned from years of handling frightened animals and worried humans alike. The faint wrinkles at the corners of her eyes hinted at laughter rather than stress. Elias stepped back to let her in. "Didn't expect you to hike out here this morning," he said. "Storm kept me awake," she replied, brushing snow from her coat. "When Harlan mentioned the dogs, I thought I'd get a head start. Animals don't pause their emergencies because of holidays." She unwrapped her gloves and crouched beside the blanket. The shepherd stiffened, but Maribel's movements were slow, practiced. "Hey, sweetheart," she murmured gently. "Let's take a look at you." Her hands inspected the dog's fur, checking for injuries, frostbite, and dehydration. "She's underweight," Maribel said quietly, "but she's a survivor. Her pup looks strong for what he's been through." She straightened, brushing her palms together. "We should take them to the clinic. I've got supplies there to warm them safely and run a hydration series. Too fast of a warm-up can shock them after a night like this." A gust of cold wind swept into the cabin as Elias went to gather the blankets. The bell chimed softly again, and Maribel's eyes flicked toward it. Interesting piece, she noted. Looks old. Not something you see on collars around here. Found her with it, Elias said. Didn't check for tags yet. We will at the clinic. They loaded the dogs carefully into Maribel's vehicle, an aging green SUV with patches of rust along the wheel wells. Its interior smelled faintly of antiseptic and hay, a scent that seemed surprisingly comforting. The drive down the mountain was slow due to the icy roads. Aspen looked brighter now, festive lights glimmering beneath the muted sky, and smoke rose from chimneys across the valley. Families would be waking soon for their holiday routines. The world seemed full of warmth that did not quite reach Elias. Maribel drove with practiced ease, one hand steady on the wheel, the other occasionally reaching back to check on the dogs. "How have you been keeping, Elias?" she asked conversationally. "Harlan said you've been sticking to yourself more than usual." "Storm season," he replied. "I like the quiet." She gave him a knowing smile. "You always did." They pulled into the parking lot of the Maple Ridge Veterinary Clinic, a low stone building softened by decorative holiday bows tied along the porch railing. Inside, the waiting room was empty, save for the smell of pine-scented cleaner and a small artificial tree standing beside the reception desk. Maribel led them into the examination room, its bright lights stark against the storm-muted morning. The mother dog lifted her head as Elias carried her to the steel table. The pup clung to his shirt, refusing to let go until he peeled its paws away gently. Maribel returned with a clipboard, a stethoscope draped around her neck. She examined the mother again, more thoroughly this time, her brow furrowing when she reached the cracked silver bell. "There's lettering inside the rim," she said, turning it gently. "Looks like Scandinavian? Could be old. Could be sentimental." Elias watched the dog's eyes follow every movement Maribel made. "She didn't come from the woods," he said. "Someone abandoned her." "Likely," Maribel agreed, "but not recently. She hasn't eaten well in weeks." She tapped her pen thoughtfully. "I'll run fluids and get her stabilized. If you're willing, I'd like you to stick around. Animals tend to respond better to whoever rescued them." Elias nodded before thinking. Yes, he was willing, though the realization surprised him. He took a seat on the small bench beside the table. The pup waddled toward him immediately, climbing into his lap with an air of ownership that made Maribel laugh. "He's chosen you," she said. "Hope you've cleared your calendar." Elias ran a hand over the puppy's head. Its fur was surprisingly soft. The mother watched, ears relaxed for the first time since he found her. The clinic fell quiet except for the hum of the heater and the scratch of Maribel's pen. As she worked, Elias couldn't help but feel the weight of the night settling into something new. Not guilt this time, not memory, but a sense of direction. Fragile, uncertain, but present. He didn't know what the cracked bell meant, or why a dog with such intelligent eyes had been left to the winter. But he knew this much. He wasn't just passing through their lives. He had stepped into a story already underway, one that felt strangely like it had been waiting for him. The late morning sun struggled to break through the winter haze as Elias stepped outside the Maple Ridge Clinic to clear his head. Clouds hovered low over Aspen like a heavy blanket stitched from gray wool, making the daylight appear pale and uncertain. The town below the ridge had begun to stir with holiday routines, cars warming in driveways, distant laughter from families preparing their Christmas meals, the faint chime of church bells traveling through cold air. Yet Elias stood alone beside Maribel's aging SUV, pulling in a slow breath. He wasn't used to spending time inside buildings filled with bright lights and steady voices. In the rescue unit, conversations were clipped, missions urgent, silence respected. Now, he found himself waiting in a warm veterinary hallway for updates like a man who belonged to a different life. He rubbed the back of his neck, glancing through the window toward the examination room. The mother shepherd, still unnamed in his mind, lay on a padded blanket recovering from fluids. Her pup had curled itself into a tight ball atop Elias's coat, as if refusing to belong anywhere else. Maribel stepped out, wiping her hands on a cloth. Her braid fell loose over her shoulder now, strands escaping like silver filaments. "She's responding well," she said. "Another hour or two and I'll let you take them home. She needs rest, water, soft foods, warmth above all." Elias nodded. "She's tough." "All mothers are," Maribel replied, her smile softening. Then she lowered her voice as if careful not to disturb even the walls. There was something else. Did you notice swelling under her collar? Just the bell, Elias said. Looked old. It is, Maribel answered. And the lettering inside, well, I took a closer look. It's not random ornamentation. It's Norse script. Could belong to a family heirloom or a specialized breeder. Elias raised a brow. So she wasn't just someone's pet. No, Maribel agreed. Someone valued her. Until they didn't. She hesitated. When animals come in with something sentimental attached, it usually means the loss didn't begin with abandonment. Something happened before that. Elias felt the weight of the cracked bell in his memory, heard again the thin ring that had carried through the storm. I don't know her story, he said quietly, but I guess it's not finished yet. Maribel placed a warm hand on his arm. Neither is yours. Before Elias could respond, the clinic door swung open, the small bell above it jingling sharply. A gust of cold air swept in with a woman carrying a cardboard box filled with cans of dog food. She moved carefully, knees bending slightly under the weight, but her posture maintained a determined dignity. She was in her early 70s, slender but strong, wrapped in a thick burgundy coat that reached her calves. Her hair, white as the snow outside, was pinned into a tidy bun, and her cheeks were flushed from the wind. She paused when she saw Elias. "Oh," she said softly, catching her breath. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're fine, Hazel," Maribel called from behind him. "Just set the donations on the counter." Hazel. Elias recognized the name. Hazel Barlow. She lived on Firwood Hill, an older woman known for rescuing stray cats and dropping off blankets at the clinic every winter. Some people described her as eccentric, others as an old soul, but no one disagreed that she cared deeply about any creature that crossed her path. Hazel placed the box on the counter with surprising steadiness for someone her age. "Well," she said, brushing her gloved hands together, "someone has to look after these little ones. People abandon animals more than they abandon responsibilities." She turned toward Elias, studying him with bright gray eyes that carried a curious mixture of gentleness and sharp intelligence. "You must be the man who found the shepherd." "I am," Elias answered. "Elias Ward." Hazel's lips curled into a warm smile. "Bless you for that. I heard she had a pup with her." Elias nodded. "A fighter." Hazel stepped closer, her voice lowering with the softness of someone who had spent many nights whispering comfort to frightened animals. "You know, dogs like that don't end up alone without reason. Sometimes they run from something, sometimes they lose someone." She paused. "People underestimate how deeply animals grieve." Elias swallowed. The words struck him more personally than she intended. Maribel returned with a clipboard. "Hazel, before you go, take a look at something." She motioned toward the examination room. Hazel followed her inside. Elias stayed near the doorway, watching from a distance. The shepherd lifted her head as Hazel approached, ears alert but calm. When Hazel knelt beside her, something subtle shifted in the room. The older woman reached out with slow precision, her hands steady. She brushed a finger across the cracked bell dangling from the collar. Her breath caught. "What is it?" Maribel asked. Hazel didn't answer immediately. She lifted the bell closer to her face, squinting at the worn inscription inside. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but in recognition deeper than simple memory. This can't be," she whispered. "I've seen this engraving before, many years ago." Elias stepped forward. "Where?" Hazel looked up, emotion trembling faintly in her voice. "My husband, God rest him, kept records of working dogs across the region. Search and rescue lineages, that script, those markings, they belong to a breeder in northern Minnesota, a small farm, not the kind with fancy paperwork. They raise shepherds with an old-world philosophy, training them for tracking, rescue work, emotional service. Their dogs were extraordinary." She placed a gentle hand on the shepherd's paw. "This girl comes from a line built to save lives." Elias stared at the mother dog with new understanding, her alert posture, her strength despite starvation, the intelligence in her eyes. She was not ordinary. And someone had abandoned her anyway. Hazel's voice softened into sadness. "The breeder vanished 5 years ago after a fire destroyed the main barn. No dogs were recorded after that. Most assumed the line was gone." She looked again at the bell. "But this bell, they gave one to every dog selected for advanced rescue work. It symbolized loyalty." The shepherd pressed her nose into Hazel's palm as if recognizing the past Hazel described. Maribel exhaled slowly. "So, she wasn't just abandoned. She might have survived something catastrophic." Hazel nodded, or escaped something. Elias felt a chill, not from the weather, but from the sudden sense that the dog he had saved had lived through a story he didn't yet understand. The puppy nuzzled his hand again, unaware of the weight settling around the adults. Maribel eventually straightened. They need rest. Hazel, you should sit for a moment. Elias, take the pup if he's getting restless. But Hazel shook her head. I'm all right. But, Elias, she turned to him with an expression he couldn't quite read. If you take her home, you may not just be giving her a place to sleep. You might be stepping into the middle of something bigger. Dogs like her don't come into people's lives for small reasons. Elias absorbed the words without reply. The bell chimed once more, soft, uneven. Yet certain, echoing quietly through the room. The afternoon light in Aspen had a strange muted quality, as if the sun were choosing to observe the world rather than illuminate it. Snow still drifted softly, but the worst of the storm had passed, leaving the town coated in a fresh blanket that sparkled faintly under the pale sky. Inside the Maple Ridge Clinic, warmth settled like a soft breath. The shepherd slept with her pup nestled along her belly, and Maribel had stepped into the office to update paperwork. Hazel sat on a small bench near the door, holding a cup of tea Maribel insisted she accept. Elias stood close to the examination table, hands loosely gripping the metal edge, more out of habit than need. His mind lingered on Hazel's words. Dogs like this don't appear by coincidence. He didn't believe in fate, not really, but he did believe in patterns, the way mountains spoke through shifting snow, the way disasters had signatures known only to those who had met them face to face. And something about the cracked bell felt like a signature, a story waiting to step out of the shadows. The clinic bell chimed again, this time with a crisp certainty that broke the quiet conversation. The door swung inward, letting a gust of cold air curl around the wooden floor. A man stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. He was tall, angular, early 40s perhaps, with sharp cheekbones and just enough stubble to suggest a beard that refused to grow in evenly. His dark hair was clipped short at the sides but longer on top, swept back in a style that tried to appear carefree but revealed too much calculation. His coat, navy blue wool with leather trim, was expensive, its cut unmistakably tailored. Beneath it, a charcoal sweater and dark jeans completed the curated casual look of a man used to being seen and listened to. His eyes were green, cool, and alert, scanning the room before settling on Maribel, who had reappeared behind the counter. "Are you the veterinarian?" he asked, voice smooth but carrying a thin edge of impatience. Maribel raised a brow. "I am. Can I help you?" "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "I'm looking for a missing dog. A German shepherd, 5 years old, female. She was stolen from my property 2 nights ago." Elias stiffened, his eyes narrowing. Hazel's grip tightened around her teacup. Maribel kept her tone professional. "Do you have a photo?" The man reached into his coat pocket and produced a sleek black phone. He swiped through a few images before holding one up. The photo displayed a shepherd, sleek, healthy, alert, standing in what looked like a large fenced yard. A silver bell hung from her collar, a bell identical to the one on the dog lying behind Elias, except this one wasn't cracked. "This is Freya," the man said, tapping the screen. "She's part of a specialized training program. I've been searching everywhere for her." Hazel stood, stepping closer. "You said stolen?" The man glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable. "Yes, there was a break-in on my property." Maribel frowned. "Do you have documentation? A license, microchip registration?" "Of course," the man said quickly. "I can show you whatever you need, but first—" His gaze shifted past Maribel toward the open exam room doorway, where Elias now moved subtly into a blocking position. The shepherd was only partly visible from the hall, but the man's eyes narrowed as if sensing her presence. "I heard from a local that someone brought in a shepherd from the woods. I'd like to see her." Elias spoke before Maribel could answer. "She's in no state for visitors." The man turned fully toward him, studying Elias with interest tinged by calculation. "And you are?" "Someone who found a freezing animal and got her help." A smile tugged at the corner of the man's mouth, polite but hollow. "Well, I appreciate that. Truly. But if she's mine, she needs to come home." Hazel stepped closer to Elias, her voice carrying a quiet steel. "Do you have proof she's yours?" I said I do, the man replied, irritation slipping through his polished tone. But I'd prefer to confirm visually before wasting time. Maribel intervened, stepping between them. Sir, no dog leaves here without proper verification, especially not one in medical recovery. He exhaled slowly, composing himself. Fine, let's do this properly. He retrieved a slim leather wallet, pulling out a laminated card with a photo of the same dog and the name Jeremy Vance printed neatly at the bottom. Registered owner, breeder documents, veterinary history. Elias eyed the card but did not reach for it. If she belongs to you, how did she end up chained in a forest during a blizzard? Jeremy's jaw pulsed once. I told you, she was stolen, Hazel said softly. But dogs trained for rescue don't usually get taken easily. Jeremy's patience thinned. Ma'am, with respect, you don't know my property, and you certainly don't know the people who might want a trained dog. His eyes flicked to the cracked bell on Elias's coat where the pup still slept. Something flashed in his expression, a recognition too controlled to be pure coincidence. Maribel touched Elias's arm lightly. Let's check the microchip, she said. That's standard procedure. Jeremy nodded, though the tightness in his shoulders remained. Inside the exam room, Maribel gently scanned the shepherd's neck, while Elias and Hazel watched the man carefully. The handheld scanner emitted a faint beep. Maribel checked the screen. Silence settled heavily. Well, Jeremy demanded. Maribel didn't look up. The chip is there, but the registration number doesn't match yours. Jeremy blinked. What? Either she was rehomed at some point, Maribel said calmly, or whoever abandoned her swapped collars. The man's composure cracked for the first time, flicker of frustration crossing his face before he smoothed it away. Let me see the dog, he insisted. I'll know if she's mine. Elias stepped fully into the doorway now. She's not ready for strangers. Jeremy's green eyes hardened. You don't seem to understand, Mr. Ward. Elias's voice lowered. I understand enough. A tense silence stretched between the two men, two very different kinds of strength measuring each other. Jeremy Vance, with his expensive coat and sharpened confidence. Elias Ward, worn by storms both internal and external, carrying a presence that suggested he had weathered worse confrontations than this. Finally, Maribel broke the standoff. Sir, if you'd like to leave contact information, we'll update you once her condition stabilizes. That's all we can offer at the moment. Jeremy studied each of their faces as if searching for a weakness. Then, with a slow, tightly controlled breath, he slipped a business card from his coat pocket and set it on the counter. Call me the moment she's awake enough for proper identification. He turned sharply and strode from the clinic, the door slamming harder than necessary. For several seconds, no one spoke. The only sound in the room was the soft, fragile chime of the cracked bell as the shepherd shifted on the blanket. Hazel let out a breath. That man is not telling us everything, Maribel agreed quietly. And I don't think the dog wants to go back there. Elias rested a hand on the shepherd's side. She leaned into the touch, weak but deliberate, and in that small gesture, the chapter of doubt ended. The dog had chosen her side. The sky over Aspen dimmed early, the kind of premature dusk that winter imposed without apology. Long shadows stretched across the clinic parking lot as Elias carried the pup in one arm and walked beside Maribel, who guided the mother shepherd slowly toward her SUV. Hazel stayed behind to help Maribel lock up, though her eyes kept drifting toward the road as if expecting the return of the tall man with the expensive coat. The air had sharpened with dropping temperatures, and the faint scent of pine resin drifted through the wind. Elias opened the back door of the SUV, laying down a fresh blanket before settling the shepherd gently onto it. The pup followed immediately, clambering over her belly and curling against her side. For a moment, everything felt almost peaceful. Too peaceful, Elias thought. After Jeremy Vance's arrival, a quiet of this kind didn't feel like calm. It felt like the moment before a storm shifted direction. Drive carefully, Maribel said to him as she handed him the rest of the dog supplies. Her strength will return slowly. No overexertion. Elias nodded. I'll keep her warm. Hazel stepped closer, slipping her gloves back on with meticulous care. Elias, she said gently, trust your instincts. Something about that man wasn't right. He gave a small, dry smile. You're not wrong about that. You're taking them to your cabin? Maribel asked. For now, Elias replied. It's quiet there. Maribel gave him an amused look. Quiet is not a word I'd associate with puppies. The pup, as if summoned by the comment, attempted to gnaw on Elias's thumb. Hazel chuckled softly. See? Once the dogs were secure inside the SUV, Elias closed the door, thanked the two women, and slid into the driver's seat. The cracked bell chimed faintly behind him as the shepherd shifted, and for a brief instant he felt again the strange pull of destiny that had begun the moment he found them in the storm. He drove up the mountain road cautiously, his headlights carving a narrow path through early evening mist. Snowbanks had grown into rounded hills along the roadside, reflecting light in muted blues and silvers. His cabin came into view between the trees, smoke rising from the chimney he'd left burning earlier. He parked, lifted the pup into his coat, and carried the mother dog inside with careful strength. Once they were settled beside the stove, Elias lit another log and watched the new flame flutter into steady existence. The cabin filled with warmth. This time, however, warmth did not feel like a temporary visitor. It felt like someone had anchored it inside these walls. The shepherd's eyes followed him as he moved through the room, laying out blankets, preparing water, checking windows. She seemed to observe him not with suspicion, but with assessment, as if memorizing the shape of this place and the man who occupied it. The pup, however, showed no such contemplation. It darted toward Elias with unsteady excitement, eager for attention. He scooped it up, feeling small paws press against his collarbone. "You're trouble," he murmured, "and you're staying out of my boots." A soft knock broke the moment. Elias turned sharply, instinct tightening. Few people ever climbed this road, especially at dusk. He approached the door slowly, glancing through the frosted window pane. A figure stood on the porch. Not Jeremy Vance, not Harlan. Someone else entirely. Elias opened the door a few inches, allowing cold air to spill through. A man in a brown canvas work jacket stood there, his hands stuffed into his pockets. He was in his mid-50s, tall but slightly hunched from years of manual labor. His hair was salt and pepper, falling loosely over a square forehead. A short beard framed his jaw, untrimmed but clean. His eyebrows were thick and drawn inward, not in anger, but in cautious thought. His boots were caked with old mud rather than fresh snow, and his face carried windburn and the dull red flush of someone who lived almost entirely outdoors. "Evenin'," the man said, voice low and gravelly, like a truck engine starting on a cold morning. "Name's Tobias Granger. Folks call me Toby." Elias did not open the door further. "Can I help you?" Tobias shifted his weight, his eyes flicking toward the interior of the cabin, with discreet curiosity. "Heard from the ranger post that someone found a shepherd in the storm last night. Thought I'd come up and see if she made it." Elias stiffened. "Why?" Toby exhaled slowly, his breath forming a cloud. "I work the trails, maintenance, mapping, clearing deadfall. Yesterday morning, before the worst of the storm, I came across fresh tracks near Red Mill Road. Not the usual wildlife patterns. Looked like a dog had been running, fast, not wandering, running from something." He paused, his expression darkening. "Then I found tire tracks that didn't belong to any of our forestry vehicles. Too close to the tree line, too deliberate." Elias opened the door another inch. "You think she was dumped?" "I don't just think it," Toby replied, voice hardening with conviction. "I know the difference between footprints left behind by choice and by fear. Something chased her. Something scared her enough to bolt. And that pup!" He gestured vaguely toward the sound of paws inside. "He's too young to travel that far unless she carried him." Elias felt the shepherd's presence at his side, her warm breath against his knee. She stood behind him now, not close enough to push forward, but close enough to be part of the conversation. "Did Jeremy Vance speak to you?" Elias asked. Toby frowned. "Who?" "He came to the clinic today, claimed he lost a shepherd." Toby's eyes narrowed, irritation blending with suspicion. "I haven't heard of any decent dog owners around here missing a trained shepherd, but I know a few men who would lie before they apologized." "Describe them," Elias said. Toby scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Usually tall, clean shoes, stiff posture, voices that sound like they're used to giving orders." It wasn't a perfect match for Jeremy, but it was close enough to raise the hairs on Elias's arms. Toby looked past Elias again. "Can I see her, just to make sure she's all right?" The shepherd stepped forward an inch, her bell chiming softly. Her eyes settled on the man, studying him. Toby knelt slowly, giving her the chance to retreat. She didn't. Instead, she lowered her head, sniffed the air near his hand, and looked up with cautious acceptance. "She's strong," Toby murmured, "but someone wanted her gone." Elias closed the door softly against the cold. "And now she's here," he said. "She's staying with me until we figure this out." Toby rose, giving a nod of respect. "Then keep her close. Mountain's calm tonight, but calm never lasts. Whatever she escaped from might not be done looking." Elias felt a chill crawl across his ribs, not from the cold outside, but from the truth inside those words. Toby stepped back onto the snowy path. "If you notice anything strange, radio the ranger station. Ask for me directly." "You a ranger?" Elias asked. "Nah," Toby said, tugging his jacket collar higher. "Just a man who pays attention." He turned, hands shoved into his pockets again, and disappeared into the darkening trees. Inside the cabin, Elias secured the latch, then leaned against the door, listening to the crackling fire. The shepherd approached him slowly, placing her head against his thigh with a soft weight that carried meaning far beyond touch. He placed a hand on her neck, feeling the cracked bell beneath his fingers. It trembled lightly, as though remembering something she could not speak. "Whatever you ran from," Elias whispered, "I'm not letting it take you again." The bell chimed once, soft, fragile, certain, and in that sound, the chapter closed. Night drifted over Aspen with a soft, deceptive calm. The kind of calm that lay across the land like a blanket while something beneath it shifted, waiting. Elias stood by his cabin window long after Toby Granger disappeared into the trees. The forest outside had begun its moonlit transformation, tall silhouettes blending into one another, branches whispering secrets as wind threaded through them. A faint silver glow reflected off the snow, giving the valley an otherworldly sheen. Inside, the shepherd slept near the stove, her body curled protectively around her pup. The cracked bell rested against her chest, warm from the heat of her fur. Elias found himself glancing at it every few minutes, not because of the sound it made, but because of the uncanny weight it seemed to carry, like a clue from a puzzle he'd unknowingly walked into. He checked the locks twice, something he rarely did, and pulled the curtains shut. He wasn't afraid of the forest, but he had learned in his years of rescue work that danger rarely came from the things you could see. As the night deepened, Elias fixed a simple meal of rice and chicken broth for the dogs. The aroma filled the small cabin, mingling with the dry crackle of burning wood. The mother shepherd lifted her head the moment he approached, eyes alert, posture stronger than earlier in the day. The pup trailed behind her like a wobbling shadow. "Slow down," Elias murmured, setting the bowls onto the floor. "Nobody's taking this away from you." He watched them eat, carefully, gratefully, the way creatures who had known hunger understood the value of each bite. A quiet settled over him as he leaned against the counter, arms crossed. His thoughts drifted to Toby's warning. Tracks don't look like that unless something's chasing them. He was still turning the words over when a sudden thump sounded outside. The shepherd froze, head snapping toward the door. Elias immediately straightened, listening. The wind moaned across the eaves, but there, beneath it, was another noise. A footstep crunching snow, controlled, heavy, deliberate. He reached for the old rescue flashlight he kept by the door and stepped outside. The cold slapped him instantly, sucking air from his lungs. Snow swirled across the porch in fine, glittering dust. But what drew his eye wasn't the weather. It was the figure walking up the path toward the cabin. A lantern swung from one hand, its dim flame casting shifting shadows across the ground. The figure was tall and bundled in a thick wool coat that brushed his knees. A knitted cap covered most of his head, with dark curls escaping at the sides. A scarf was wrapped high over his mouth, hiding everything below the eyes. And the eyes, deep brown, sharp, restless, watched Elias with a searching intensity. "Evening," the man said, voice muffled by the scarf but steady. "Sorry to intrude this late." He stopped a respectful distance away, lowering the lantern so its light spread across the snow. Elias kept his hand on the doorframe. "Can I help you?" The man removed his scarf, revealing a defined jawline dusted with a few days' worth of dark stubble. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with weathered skin around the eyes suggesting long exposure to wind and sun. His face held a mix of rugged resilience and quiet thoughtfulness, the type of man built by outdoor labor rather than office lights. "My name's Calder Hayes," he said. "I live down by the West Trail, about 1.5 miles from here." Elias recognized the name vaguely. There were only a handful of permanent residents scattered along the West Ridge. Calder Hayes was said to be a craftsman of sorts, someone who carved wood for a living, shipped pieces to art fairs, but mostly kept to himself. People described him as polite but distant, a man who preferred trees over neighbors. "What do you need?" Elias asked. Calder's breath fogged in the cold. "I came to warn you. Toby Granger stopped by my place earlier. Told me he had found signs of a dog being chased near Red Mill Road. Said you were the one who found her." He paused, the silence carrying unspoken concern. "You should know. I saw something too." Elias's pulse sharpened. "What kind of something?" Calder shifted, gripping the lantern more tightly. Tracks along the west ridge, not just canine, human, 2 sets, deep treads from heavy boots, fresh, real fresh. They walked parallel to each other, and then split near the gorge like they were circling. His voice lowered. And they weren't following deer or elk. They were following dog prints. Elias's jaw clenched. The shepherd had struggled even to stand this morning. Whoever these people were, they had covered ground she never could have on her own. Calder continued. "I tracked them for a while, but they doubled back toward the old ranger outpost. I figured Toby should know, and then I heard you were the one who brought the shepherd into town." He glanced toward the cabin door. "Is she here?" "She is," Elias said cautiously. Something in Calder softened. "Good. Toby was right to warn you. Something's off. A dog that valuable doesn't get dumped for no reason. And 2 men don't trek into a storm like that unless they're after something." The shepherd began barking behind the door, short, sharp bursts of alarm but not fear. Elias cracked the door open. She stood there braced, her pup tucked behind her legs. Calder nodded slowly, his eyes on the dog. "Beautiful animal. Smart, too. It's been a while since I saw a shepherd that alert." He adjusted his coat. "Look, I don't know the full story, but I know this much. If someone wanted her badly enough to chase her through a storm, they might come looking again." Elias studied him for a long moment. Calder Hayes' face held no deception, only the sincerity of a man whose life depended on reading nature honestly. His hands were rough, calloused along the fingers from carving tools and lifting lumber. His boots were weather-beaten, patches sewn onto the sides with careful precision. Everything about him said capable, grounded, observant, and Elias found himself believing him. "Why tell me?" Elias asked. Calder looked out toward the trees. "Because Toby said you were the one who didn't walk away." His expression grew solemn. "And men like that are worth helping." For the first time since the blizzard, Elias felt something shift inside him. An old familiarity, the recognition of another man who understood danger without romanticizing it. "You should get inside," Calder said. "Storm's coming back tonight." Elias frowned. Forecast said clear skies. Calder shook his head. Forecast wasn't looking at the ridge. He pointed toward the horizon. A line of clouds, dark, fast-moving, had begun to form along the peaks, approaching with silent determination. When they come from that angle, they don't play gentle. Elias nodded slowly. "Thank you." Calder stepped backward, lifting the lantern. "Take care of her, Elias Ward. You know my name?" "Small Mountain," Calder replied simply. "People hear things." He gave a final nod and disappeared into the creeping darkness, the lantern light shrinking until the forest swallowed it whole. Inside the cabin, Elias secured the door again. The shepherd pressed against him, trembling just enough for him to feel it. The pup tumbled clumsily near her paws, unaware of the tension radiating through the room. Elias knelt beside them, placing a steady hand over the dog's ribcage. "Whoever's looking for you," he whispered, "they're not getting you back." Outside, the wind shifted direction, carrying with it the scent of something returning, something neither mountain nor man had invited. And in that uneasy silence, the chapter found its edge. Wind pressed against the cabin walls in long, low gusts that carried the promise of a storm far more deliberate than the last. Elias moved through the small living space with quiet purpose, securing windows, checking the stove, and making sure the blankets around the shepherd and her pup were thick enough to retain warmth. Outside, the mountains brooded beneath a sky gathering layers of dark ink. Calder Hayes had been right. Something was brewing in the ridges, something heavy and fast-moving, the kind of storm that arrived without waiting for permission from forecasts or calendars. Dusk transitioned into night with unsettling speed. The forest, earlier alive with faint bird song and the creaking of frozen branches, fell into an unnatural hush. The shepherd lifted her head every few minutes, ears twitching at sounds Elias couldn't decipher. Her pup stayed close to her, though it occasionally bounded toward Elias with that familiar, reckless confidence that puppies carried like a birthright. Elias couldn't help but kneel and steady its wobbling steps, running a hand over its small spine each time it stumbled against him. He had just set a pot of broth over the stove when a series of distant pops cracked across the valley. Firewood splitting, ice collapsing. Elias listened, his entire body stilling. The shepherd rose halfway, her bell chiming with a faint metallic question. Elias stepped to the window, pushing aside the curtain. Snow drifted lazily, almost peacefully, but the ridge to the east glowed faintly, pulsing with intermittent flashes, white-orange sparks swallowed too quickly by the dark. He narrowed his eyes. Not lightning. Those were flares, rescue flares. Before he could consider the implications, a knock hit the door, 3 sharp raps, followed by a fourth, softer one. Not the aggressive pounding of Jeremy Vance, not the cautious pace of Toby Granger. Something in the rhythm was precise, practiced. Elias opened the door slowly. A woman stood on the porch, leaning slightly against the railing. Her breaths escaped as pale clouds that trembled in the frigid air. She looked to be in her late 30s, tall and slender beneath a dark insulated jacket streaked with snow. Her hair was a deep auburn, tied in a low braid that whipped lightly in the wind. Sharp cheekbones framed a face both determined and weary, with faint lines around her hazel eyes suggesting years of navigating stress rather than age alone. She carried herself with the posture of someone accustomed to outdoor terrain, balanced, alert, but currently running on the very last reserves of her strength. "I'm sorry to drop in unannounced," she said, her voice low but steady. "My name is Serena Holt. I work with the Search and Alpine Response Network." She lifted one hand just enough for Elias to see the embroidered patch on her jacket sleeve, a mountain crest crossed by a rescue rope. "We picked up aerial signals that someone fired flares from the South Ridge. Toby Granger told us you lived up here and that you might have seen something." Elias opened the door wider, stepping aside. Serena walked in, brushing snow from her shoulders. Up close, the intensity of her presence became even more apparent. She had the bearing of someone carrying an invisible weight. Fatigue mixed with urgency, wrapped in the discipline of a professional who'd spent too many years in unpredictable weather. She unzipped her jacket, revealing a fitted navy fleece beneath it, and exhaled a slow breath as she warmed her hands near the stove. "You tracked flares this far north?" Elias asked. "There were multiple signals," Serena said, pushing damp strands of hair behind her ear. "We can't tell if they were distress flares or diversion attempts. Either way, we're spread thin tonight. The storm moving in complicates everything." She glanced toward the shepherd. "Toby mentioned you found a dog that might be connected to something unusual." Elias nodded. "She's a rescue dog, from a line that disappeared years ago. Someone came looking for her today, claimed she was stolen, but her microchip doesn't match any registry." Serena crouched near the shepherd, keeping a respectful distance. "Smart eyes," she murmured. "Not the kind that panic easily." She straightened, her face tightening with thought. "There's been chatter lately, unconfirmed reports about handlers transporting unregistered working dogs across state lines. Dogs with specialized training." Elias tensed. "For what?" Serena hesitated. "Tracking, security, illegal acquisition, nothing proven. But if someone was moving dogs like her and something went wrong..." She let the thought trail off, though its shape remained obvious. The shepherd whined softly, leaning against Elias's leg. Serena watched the gesture with raised eyebrows. "She trusts you. That's significant." Before Elias could answer, another flare lit the sky, this time closer. A muted boom followed a heartbeat later, rattling the cabin windows. The pup scampered to hide behind Elias's boots. Serena moved to the door, her expression sharpening. "That was intentional and close. Less than half a mile." Elias grabbed his coat. "If someone's out there hurt..." She held up a hand. "Wait, not every flare means rescue. Some are meant to flush people out." She scanned the tree line through the window. "I need to check it, but not alone. And you know this terrain better than I do." Elias hesitated only a moment before nodding. "The dogs stay here." The shepherd immediately barked, low and protective. Elias knelt beside her. "I'll be back," he murmured, placing a hand over her fur. The bell chimed softly against his palm, its cracked edge catching the light again. The sound felt like a quiet plea, or a warning. Serena secured her jacket, clipped a compact radio to her chest, and opened the door. Cold wind surged inward, swirling around. "Them!" Elias grabbed his old avalanche pack from a hook near the door, still stocked with essentials despite years of disuse, a habit he had never unlearned. They stepped outside. Snowflakes brushed against their faces, thin and sharp. Serena moved with practiced caution, scanning the shadows while Elias led the way up a narrow trail that curved along the cliffside. The ridgeline was barely visible under the growing storm front. As they approached the source of the flare, Serena crouched, pointing to the snow. Tracks. Elias knelt beside her. 2 sets of human prints, large, heavy, fresh. Serena's voice dropped. These match reports we've been tracking for weeks. Private hunters looking for trained dogs. The prints continued north, weaving toward a grove of thick pines. Suddenly, Serena stopped, raising a hand. Lights! Ahead! Elias saw them too, small beams weaving weakly between the trees. At first they resembled flashlights, but the moment the figures stepped fully into view, the truth hit with cold clarity. 2 men, broad-shouldered, bundled in tactical winter gear, faces obscured by dark neck gaiters and goggles, moved toward the trail. One carried a metal case. The other swept the area with a long-range thermal scanner. They were not hikers, not rescuers, and not lost. Serena inhaled slowly. They're searching. For her, Elias said. Before the men could close the distance, Serena grabbed Elias's sleeve, pulling him behind a fallen log. The men's voices carried faintly through the trees, a clipped, professional cadence that echoed the dangerous confidence of people accustomed to being obeyed. We'll circle the ridge, one muttered. She couldn't have gotten far. And the pup? The other asked. Retrieve both. The buyer wants options. Elias felt his stomach harden. Serena's jaw clenched. The men disappeared up the slope. We need to get back to your cabin, she whispered. Elias was already moving. They descended the trail far faster than was advisable, slipping through the dark toward the cabin's faint glow. Snow thickened into icy needles as the wind strengthened. When the cabin finally came into sight, the shepherd stood at the window, silhouetted, alert, ears straight. She sensed them, and sensed the danger coming behind them. Elias reached for the door. Serena looked over her shoulder, catching motion far up the ridge. They're coming, she said. Elias ushered Serena inside, shut the door, and dropped the latch. The shepherd pressed against him, trembling not with fear, but readiness. He placed a hand on her neck. They want you, he whispered, but they're not getting you. Outside, the wind roared, carrying the storm into full force, and the chapter closed where danger finally arrived. In the end, when the storm passed and the mountains stood quiet again, there was something indescribable in the air. Something gentler than wind, softer than snowfall, something no one could quite explain. Maybe it was only the hush that follows danger, or the relief that settles after fear. But those who lived through that night knew it was more than that. It was the kind of silence where miracles speak. For in the coldest hours, when a lost dog cried out for mercy, when a man who had forgotten hope found courage again, when strangers stepped forward not for glory, but for goodness, something sacred moved among them, something that felt like the quiet hand of God guiding ordinary lives toward extraordinary purpose. And isn't that how blessings often come to us, not in grand visions or thunderous voices, but in small moments of compassion? A door opened in a storm, a life saved when no one was watching, a kindness offered without being asked. These are the everyday miracles we overlook, the ones heaven plants gently into our path, waiting for us to see. If there is a lesson hidden in this story, let it be this. Even in the darkest nights, God's light does not falter. Even when we feel abandoned, He is already sending someone our way. And even when the world grows cold, there is always warmth left in the hearts, willing to save, to love, and to believe again. Tonight, may you remember that miracles are not rare. They are simply quiet, and they happen through people like you,